Greetings, friends. It's your friendly neighborhood PhD, Dr. Judd Burton, welcoming you to another edition of the Beyond Report. Belated Happy New Year to everyone. Hope everybody's doing well in the new year. Um, keep in mind for our um, uh, Eastern Orthodox and Russian Orthodox Christians, brothers and sisters, we'll be celebrating Christmas here on January the 6th. And um, for those of us in the West, I suppose that's another excuse to leave your Christmas decorations up all the way through January. I probably will. Uh, at any rate, I thought today I would take a little bit of time and reflect on a story that I read recently about, or rather, by an undergraduate student in history, and I won't call him out by name, uh, but I do have a few critiques about this article. And the blog entry basically was a critique of a very postmodern social justice warrior sort of critique of the character Indiana Jones. Now, many of you will recognize that name, of course, from the Indiana Jones movies like Raiders of the Lost Ark, Temple of Doom, Last Crusade, that sort of thing. Very iconic figure associated with archaeology. A lot of us that got involved in archaeology who were children when those movies came out kind of looked to him as a kind of hero in the field. At any rate, this particular blog entry, this article, a young man is sort of deconstructing uh, Indiana Jones along these lines. And the criticisms that he levels at him include things like, well, he's a glorified treasure hunter or grave robber, and that uh, he belongs to a sort of imperialist colonial approach to archaeology when um, archaeology was in its infancy, and Western countries were conducting archaeology to fill their museums. Uh, a lot of that, I think, is not really fair. Okay, I think we could say that. Okay, number one, Indiana Jones, Dr. Henry Jones Jr. is a fictitious creation of George Lucas. He's a fictional character. So there needs to be some license there with him. However, um, that's not to say that there aren't some um, decent aspects to the character. Um, we have to remember that most of these stories take place in like the 1930s, and of course, if you watch any of the extended material, like the um, what was the series, the Young Indiana Jones, Adventures of Young Indiana Jones, you go all the way back through his childhood in the earlier 1900s. Um, we have to remember that the discipline of archaeology was in its infancy and was still sort of developing and evolving at the time. And there was no such thing as cultural resource management. There was no such thing as really getting in the indigenous population or native population, trying to get them interested in their own culture. Was there an element of pilfering countries for their antiquities? Well, of course. Um, that doesn't justify that happened morally. It just was that the discipline of archaeology was still sort of developing and evolving, and the industrialized countries who were conducting most of it had the means and resources to devote to preserving these antiquities. And so, yes, we can criticize them, but only to a point, I think. Otherwise, we're committing a kind of presentism, a projection of modern ideologies onto these past eras, past decades, when archaeology was still developing. Um, Now, the the kid that wrote this article, and I'll call him a kid because he looks to be about 20 years old, is an undergraduate at an Ivy League school, wants to be a history professor, and he probably will be. Um, but it's pretty clear to me that he really doesn't understand how archaeology works in the modern era and how, in some cases, the Indiana Jones model does hold true. Now, I'm not saying that that's blanket, of course. You don't actually see a whole lot of archaeology in the Indiana Jones movies, but you do see some. And you do see some of the other things that have to take place in the course of any given research project. And I was talking with a really good friend of mine the other night. Who is also an archaeologist and has done a lot of work with me in the field, particularly in the state of Texas. B- and we reason, first of all, that this kid is really naive, and second of all, I doubt whether the kid has actually turned over trowel one of soil on an excavation, much less having gone through the process of developing a prospectus for a project and actually going through uh, the acquisition of monies and grants and putting together crews and um, that sort of thing. But there are also, dangers sometimes to life and limb, depending on where you are. And sometimes you have to rub elbows with some pretty shady people, to accomplish the end goal. Now, I'm not encouraging, illegal activities, but I'll expand on that in just a second. Um, but For example, the first archaeological expedition that I was ever on, as it drew to a close, there were terrorists that were launching missiles at us and firing their weapons off, trying to kill us. Um, the and that was in on the border of Lebanon and Syria and the Golan Heights in Israel. Um, I can think of another example where sometimes you have to kind of rub elbows with shady people. I've done work in Peru before, and sometimes you have to talk to people who are sort of operating under let's just say the radar of the law, who may be knowledgeable about particular sites that you're interested in. Um, and as a challenge to this sort of textbook black and white, straight laced, no jagged edges approach to archaeology, how do people think that, for instance, some of these fragments of papyri or ancient texts have showed up? Not all of those were acquired through just pristine, clean channels. Some of those were purchased from illegal antiquities dealers, and you can go and look. This stuff is public record. You can go and look at it if you want to. Um, but the point that I'm making here is that uh, the distance between point A, the beginning of an archaeological project, and point B, the ending of said archaeological project, is not always a straight line. And so I see a lot of naivete in this kid's criticism of Indiana Jones, because there's actually a lot of, um, although there's fantasy and fictitiousness to the character, there are also some things that bear out in reality. And again, people that do work in archaeology in all parts of the world will tell you that, sometimes there are dangers to life and limb. Sometimes the geopolitics of a given place where you're at have direct bearing on your safety, and sometimes you have to you rub elbows with some pretty shady people. Again, that's not to say that we in the archaeological community, the anthropological community, support um, those kinds of things. What we're trying to do is to push the cultural resource management idea and get people invested in their own heritage as we lend our expertise to help them in that path. Now, I applaud this young man's um, desire to become a historian, to become an archaeologist, but he may need to um, this altogether, and perhaps stay in the classroom and not get involved in field work unless he can shed this naivete, which he may do through experience. Um, at any rate, if you're really interested in this article and who this kid is, you can Google search and you can find this article that critiques Indiana Jones. At any rate, those are some thoughts that I had about this particular article. And again, I don't want to launch ad hominem attacks at this young man. He's young and untried, as we all were at some point in this field. Uh, all right. In other news, as I've pointed out on a number of my posts on Facebook and social media, January is going to be a month where I talk more about Paneas, and that's usually going to be within the context of Bible studies. So, more Sunday School X is coming back. I've got some Antiquity X episodes as well, but mainly the Paneas, Caesarea Philippi stuff is going to be in Sunday School X. And it's kind of in keeping with the time, probably when Jesus and his disciples were at Caesarea Philippi, um, that time in the winter before his death. On that note, if you're interested in some historical background, my book Paneas, along with other titles in the catalog, is on sale this week for 10% off, and I'll put a link in the description for that if you want to take advantage of that. Um, but yeah, there's lots going on. Going to have some viewer picks, viewer favorite topics on Antiquity X this month. Um, just a lot of new material that I'm getting ready to put out. Um, So stay tuned, and perhaps I'll do some more Greek readings too. I did a reading from Luke chapter 2 in Greek on the Quick Classics channel, and everybody seemed to really like that. So I may do that with other passages at some point in time. But I just thought it'd be kind of neat to hear the Christmas story in the original Greek. Uh, all right. Thanks, guys, for tuning in, and I'll see you soon. Godspeed.